Brian. So this is the progress report here for the last Wednesday in April. You won't be here next week.
I will not, but you know the joke. April showers bring May flowers. What do May flowers bring? Pilgrims. Come on, Bob. It's a third grade joke, man.
It's a third rate joke. So we're very pleased that you're joining us here on the progress report for this Wednesday, the last one in April, as I said. We have an outstanding guest with us tonight, Declan McEachern. He is one of a field of 8 running for the 1st Congressional District as the Democratic nominee, because our congressman for 3 terms with some interruptions, Carol Shea Porter, is not returning or seeking to return to Congress. So there's quite a field, and it's an interesting field. And I think we have one of the most interesting and thoughtful candidates that we could welcome to our show with us tonight, Declan McEachern. But, and of course, we hope you'll call in, and if you have questions and want to participate, it's 640-3091 as always, and we always welcome our callers. And so keep that in mind. And as always, we like to start off out there with the POTUS report on the progress report, which Mike has made a valued feature of this most dangerous hour on TV.
Our weekly kickoff feature. Actually, I'm kind of happy to do a quick POTUS report on the progress report today. I'm going to feed off of last week's POTUS report on the progress report, which turns out to have
just refresh us.
Been a little bit prescient.
Memory problems. What did you say last week?
I kind of quickly ran down that I was concerned that there was a trap being set up. We had 3 chairmen of congressional committees had sent a letter to the Justice Department seeking unredacted copies of the Comey memos that had been seized.
Yep,
and of course, there's some sensitive information in there, and they were looking for unredacted copies, and the Justice Department was asking for additional time. And at that time, we didn't know how it was going to shake out, and I was a little concerned that it might have been a setup in order to take some people out for non-compliance, or at least to build a
particularly
case
the fired
against
FBI Director James Comey. They were hoping to take him down with these
So,
memos.
but as it turns out, slightly redacted copies of those memos were in fact released to the committees, I think on Thursday, the day after our show, which is not what I expected when I gave the last POTUS report. But they were leaked by 6 o'clock in the afternoon that day, and it turns out that they were very beneficial to the Comey side of the story. And so my fear that it was going to be some sort of a setup and there'd be some confrontations, it seems to have been dissipated. It seems that the congressional chairmen were satisfied with the redacted copies that they got. And certainly the end result of the whole thing seems to have not redounded to the benefit that they were anticipating. So,
well, indeed, the New York Times had a piece saying it appears to have backfired on them.
Well, that's
because it backed up everything that Comey has declared in these interviews he's done on ABC and other venues, and the material in his book. It's exactly backed up. So it's not quite like the Watergate tapes that completely backed up the charges of James Dean. Not James Dean, what am I? John Dean. John Dean, the counsel to the president back in those days. By God, I actually remember that, Mike, and the Watergate, and John Dean, having served some time in prison, is rehabilitated, and you can see him often talking about the parallels between what we're dealing with now, especially with the threat to fire the special prosecutor. Because we all remember that those days, well, those of us who can remember, it was a wonderful gentleman named Archibald Cox, very distinguished Boston Brahmin, who had been named the special prosecutor, and Nixon decided at some point he had to fire him because he was getting too close to really tearing into the presidential excuses and lies and misdeeds, and that's never been forgotten, and we're already seeing the parallels are just stunning to that, and but that's not the show for tonight.
Yeah,
we can.
But I do have to say, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good that we happen to pick that particular topic, and it really blew up toward the end of the weekend. So, other than that, we'll have another POTUS report on the progress report in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, okay. We look forward to it. I just wanted to mention a couple other things before I get to our guest, and we want to give him a full opportunity for a real good airing of his reasons for running and what he has to offer. The first is that, we've in the last 2 weeks we've done 2 shows on very important topics. I think it was last week we did the show with Jenny Hruska on the Marsy's Law, And I hope some of you remember and watch that show, because she made an excellent case that Marsy's Law was not a good idea to put these things into the state constitution. The vote on Marsy's Law is going to be tomorrow in the State House. And it's already passed the Senate. It has to get a 60% margin in both houses. It's got it in the Senate. We'll see tomorrow whether they get it in the House. My guess is that they won't. There's been some pretty vigorous pushback on this, and I happen to share in that opinion. And I know Gary Hopper was just on before us does too. That's one of the things we do agree on. So that's coming up, and if you watched that show last week, to pay attention to what happens in the House tomorrow, because if this bill should get the necessary 60% in the New Hampshire House, it would go on the ballot in November, and there's a vast array of money ready to promote this in that election. Not a vast array, a vast sum of money from the sponsor of these efforts in many states. So that's number one. And number two, the week before that, we had on Mike DeSalle, the Dean of UNH Manchester, who was working so closely with Dean Kamen, our spectacular citizen, entrepreneur, inventor here in Manchester.
Two deans.
And the Advanced Regenerative Medicine Institute, or ARMY. And it turns out that tomorrow we're voting on a bill to support that project with some exemptions from the business profits and business enterprise taxes for the first 10 years, and also a program to provide some forgiveness of student loan indebtedness for students that come here, people come work here and agree to stay for 5 years. And I think that's gonna pass too. So those are two big things that are happening tomorrow when I go up to join the other elite in the New Hampshire House. And with that, I want to now at least finally get to introduce Declan McEachern. Declan, thanks for coming down. We're very pleased to have you here. You addressed the Manchester City Dems at their last meeting, and I found myself very, very impressed with what you had to tell us. And so I hope you'll start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you decided that you want to run for Congress, but a little bit about your background, which I thought was extremely interesting.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Mike. It's great to be here. It's great to be back in Manchester, and we spend a lot of time in Manchester now. But I'm from Portsmouth originally, and if your viewers at home are trying to figure out how to pronounce my name, I can assure you that once you learn it, it's tough to forget, but it's tough to learn.
In fact, I think you may be the first Declan I've ever known.
And I was the first Declan I ever knew. A lot of people told me that my name was actually Declan. And you'll never believe the conversation you will have with somebody that is trying to convince you of how to pronounce your own name. So that's something that I certainly have struggled with. I also respond to, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this. That was the typical first day of class for me. The teacher not wanting to butcher it. It was, but Declan McEachern.
How did you get that name?
So Paul McEachern, he was Paul, Mary, John, a lot of New Testament type names in there. And so I think with my brothers and my sisters, it's Claire, Alec, Duncan, Declan, and Molly. So you're not going to find any of those names in the New Testament.
They abandoned the First Testament names.
So we're a bunch of Irish Catholics, and so that's where we get the names from. You know, you're not an Irish Catholic unless you have an Aunt Mary, and you know we got one of those. So.
Yes, you do.
But yeah, it's certainly a unique name. It's shaped, I guess, a lot of first day of classes. But my dad gave me more than a name. He was involved in politics back in the '80s, and some of your viewers might remember him as the best governor we never had. But '86 and '88, he went up against first John Sununu and then Judd Gregg, and ran some campaigns back when New Hampshire wasn't as progressive, when it was a little bit more red. Redder even than Mike's shirt on tonight, and that's something that's
a little bit more red. It was very red back
then. Very red.
He fought the valiant fight.
He did, and it impressed upon me. People ask me, did he encourage you to do this? Knowing Paul, it's not to be encouraged. He never wants to put his thumb on the scale, so to speak, but the life that he chose to lead and fighting for people that needed help, and that's what I learned Democrats were. We were the fighters that joined the causes that were just. And that's something that it's hard not to, especially as a small little kid from Portsmouth with red glasses and an eye patch, you identified with Democrats. You identified that they were pushing back against a bully and trying to figure out what that bully was and joining in that fight. And that's something that certainly has stuck with me.
Yeah. So you grew up and went, I guess, to schools in Portsmouth. What have you been doing since?
Yeah, so I graduated Phillips Exeter, and I learned how to row there. So I went out to California, Berkeley, Cal for me, because I was an athlete. But I learned, I joined the team there as a walk-on and left as the captain. And rowing, for your viewers, that's something you do when you are tall and you are not good at basketball. That's if I had picked any other sport, it would have been any sport with any sort of potential for
A lot of
earning.
legs and back in rowing, huh?
Legs and back and rowing. And Mike, I got to commend you on knowing that, because most people just think it's arms. When we trained with the Navy SEALs, they're like, you guys should be better at push-ups. It's like, we literally don't do any push-ups. It's all pulling. It's all our legs. It's all our back. So that's something, but it's teamwork. And you learn how to work together with guys, and you learn how to hurt and for a cause and to really join together. And that's
It's real precision teamwork, too. It takes a lot of practice to get that right.
It does. It's really good for ads on TV when they're trying to sell some sort of
Yeah.
drug or something like that. They'll
Good
show
notice.
the precision of rowing. And it's being able to practice enough so you can do it when you're tired. And that's really why you'll train 16,000 hours for something that you're doing in about 6 minutes. And that's something that is certainly instilled in me a work ethic, but it also let me travel the world. I got to go to Cambridge and study their history there. I got to represent the United States in South America, Europe, Asia. These were great opportunities, and it took me to a training center outside New York, and I went in there to meet a college roommate of mine, and I met my wife. So that's the biggest thing that I took away
Okay.
from rowing.
Brian's telling us it's time for our first break.
Okay.
It's amazing how fast the time
It
goes
does-
by
it
here.
does go by quick.
And we'll be back real quick.
Well, we
and
have a
you
real
continue the
cliffhanger
story.
right there.
Yeah.
We can get back
Yeah,
on the
we
story.
want to hear that story for sure. So, folks, this will be our first of our 2 breaks, as always the case on the Progress Report. And please, if you're interested and want to participate, 640-3091 with Declan McEachern, and we'll be right back for the second segment of the show, just in a very brief time. Okay, it's the Progress Report for this, the last Wednesday in April, and we are now hosting the second of our field of candidates for the Democratic nomination for this first congressional district in New Hampshire. We've had
Wide open district.
wide open district, retiring Congressman Carol Shea Porter, an open seat, and a lot of people think it may be quite a good year for the blue team, the Democratic team. And I think we've been ably represented by Carol Shea Porter, and I hope she'll come back and join us for a wrap-up sometime before we get too far down the road. But at this point, we are very pleased to have with us Declan McEachern, who is a Portsmouth guy, but he has an interesting resume. He was telling us about that. And I'm going to just ask you to continue.
Yeah, so
You tell you.
You were expecting to meet a roommate, and you found a
yeah,
wife.
so I met
huh?
my wife. It took her a little bit to realize that I knew right away, but it took me a couple of years to convince her. And the time I retired from rowing, and retire I'll put in quotes because I wasn't earning. I earned about $200 a year as a rower, so it's not unlike a state rep.
Actually, it's better pay.
A lot of hard work, long hours, couple $100. But we moved out to California, and I joined a tech company. And my wife she decided she was going to learn
No,
coding.
she's a California person?
No, she's from Virginia originally, and she moved to New York, and we met there, moved out to California. I eventually moved back to New York, and I was opening this office in New York and managing Canada and our efforts into Asia and and Europe, and then our efforts to remove ourselves from Asia, because that was a bad idea. But learning a lot. My wife decided that she was going to learn how to program. So she took about 8 weeks, learned to do that right after we got married, and started her own business. And everything was going great. So this little kid from Portsmouth, New Hampshire with red glasses and an eye patch couldn't have believed this opportunity that was in front of him, marrying the woman of my dreams. And
Why the red eye patch? Did you have enough
no, so I had red glasses.
strabismus or something?
Yeah, so I have a lazy eye, and that's hard to always convince of a young kid that you call it a lazy eye, but I had a lazy eye.
I remember that when I was in grammar school.
Yeah.
They did a check for it, and
Yeah,
there was
so I
always
failed that.
one poor kid that ended up with the eye patch
and
for
it's not, you know,
quite a while,
it's
actually, to
not-
strengthen that lazy
yeah,
eye,
it's
right?
to strengthen the
Yeah.
lazy eye. It's to kind of get it on board. And it wasn't like Pirates of the Caribbean cool eye patch. And I tried to put
No,
stickers on it,
no.
and it didn't work. It was not cool.
I feel
and
for you, because I remember
I'm
those
just
kids
not
when
looking forward if this campaign gets negative and they blanket with mailers on Declan McCacken with this eye patch. But
Hey, embrace it, own it.
You might be able to embrace that like you do your name, because
Yeah.
as you said, once people got your name, they got it.
It's tough to forget. But on a more serious note, my wife got sick. She woke up August 4th, 2014, and couldn't feel her arms or her legs. And that began a 2-year process. And the process is ongoing. We just know what's going on now. It's an autoimmune disease. We manage it. But going into that, it was the most expensive thing that we had to pay for. You know, we were saving to buy a house. And we didn't, you know, we weren't saving for that long, so we didn't have the money. It was $5,000 that we had to come up with right away, that day, once we went to the ER and she was classified as outpatient and taken into an MRI. That's more money than anybody I know is walking around with. So we put it on credit cards, and we were lucky enough to put on credit cards. And I'll never forget being down in the billing office and looking at my 2 credit cards. I had one that was paid in the first of the month, one that was paid in the 14th, and I had to hopefully pick the right one. Now, if I picked the wrong one, who knows what was going to happen. You know, it's likely I would have a chance to run another card, but I just didn't want that stigma, like, oh, this person might not be able to pay, maybe we should take a different look. So it was a very anxious experience, and then the process of trying to figure it out, how we were going to do that. And it comes down to, I wish government had been there for us. I wish we had a Medicare for all or single-payer system for us, because that anxiety, we already had enough trying to figure out how we were going to pay. You
And
know,
if you'd still been rowing in Cambridge, it would have been no problem at all.
it would have been no problem at
The
all.
National Health Service.
They have a national
which
health.
my son enjoys. He lives in London, and you know, it's really nice.
Well, so everybody, they put a lot of fear-mongering around how you're going to pay for it. How are you going to pay for it? Well, I'm here to tell you, we paid for it. We paid for our health insurance. There was no free lunch for us. We paid for it. We paid about $13,000 in total out-of-pocket fees each of those 2 years trying to figure out what's going on. And that's a lot of money for anybody to come up with. So we're paying for it. We're just paying for it when we're not able to, when we're sick, when we're basically at our lowest.
We're paying for it in the prices, the uncompensated care that's out there. We all pay the portion when they hand you the bill.
Yeah, and we're not doing a great job at providing. And it would be one thing if we had the best care in the world and best outcomes in the world, but we don't. And it's true, Canada has higher taxes, 3%. But they're not paying anything when they go into the doctor. They're not going and worrying about, they're certainly not going bankrupt because of medical
They're not
expenses.
getting hit in their paycheck for their portion of the insurance that for some reason comes through their private employer.
And that's you know, Mike, that's a great point. It's coming through the private employer. And what is that limiting? That's limiting innovation. That's limiting people starting their small businesses, creating jobs. People ask
Every
me,
November, my boss struggles. How am I going to keep my people insured and not just take it right on the chin? Because these numbers, the increase year upon year upon year is unsustainable.
I go around and now I get to tour the district, and that's probably the most fun you get to have as a candidate. You get to talk to people, you get to interact. I was up in Lupine Pet. They said the increases that they had, if they didn't have to pay health insurance, you know, either their prices drop 20% across the board, or they give each employee $5 an hour more. And they're already starting, everybody's making $12 an hour there. So it's a very real cost that we're paying. It's preventing people from starting businesses. It's depressing wages as you're not going around. And I call it the rental car healthcare system in this country, meaning you're on insurance for 3 to 5 years. That could be because you change jobs, or your insurer changes plans to try to keep those costs low, or you go in and out of coverage. But health insurance companies have no incentive to keep us healthy because they know they're going to be off in a couple of years, and they know when you're 65 you're going to be on Medicare, and so they're not your problem. And that's what we got to get away with if we ever want to stabilize costs. And I'm happy to have this conversation in Democratic primary. I'm more excited to have this conversation in a general election because I think progressive values are American values, and if we can put them in economic values when we're talking independence, then we actually can move the ball forward and get it changed.
How do you get through the myth that the nationalized healthcare, socialized healthcare systems in other countries have terrible outcomes, horrible results? Everybody who really
Everybody
needs
has
help,
to wait and wait and wait to get care.
and they're coming here to pay the big bucks to get our
Yeah.
great doctors, when those statistics and the facts are completely otherwise.
Yeah, so
how do you break through the myth?
Yeah, a part of that is my personal story with this. I mean, we saw firsthand how broken the system is. And we see firsthand, we're on the campaign trail, we're meeting with people, mothers of people addicted to opioids that are trying to break through that themselves. If this is such a great system, why is Anne Marie going down and putting her daughter in Florida and then paying $3,500 a month out of her own pocket to keep her daughter alive? Those are not, we just have to keep pushing that in terms of a personal story and connection. But two, we have to be upfront with Democrats. We got to be all telling this story. I don't think our job as Democrats is to read polls, wait till something gets to 54%, and then get behind it. We kind of have to change polls, and that's going to require politicians, but more importantly, folks that are voting to say, yeah, I actually believe in that. I want to go help support that candidate who's actually talking about these issues and not just saying, yes, I will pay lip service to this in my heart. I hold that to be true, but we're going to work incrementally. I think we got to push the ball a little bit farther.
So I'm sure our viewers will want to know, how's your wife doing now? After
So
this crisis?
it's a chronic disease, Bob, and she's doing a lot better. She's managing our campaign. She believes as strongly in this fight as I do, that she has put her consulting practice on hold to join this fight with me. But there's some days that are tougher. There's some days where it's not that easy to get out of bed, and that's something that we didn't talk about enough when we were going through it because we didn't have the answers. And I think it's that and she's new to the state, but that live free or die attitude, that we're not gonna ask for help, we're not gonna talk about these things. But now that we know what's going on, and now that we have our belief that we can change the system, we're shouting it from the rooftops.
That's really great. My goodness, I'm very impressed. I tell you.
Well,
that's
someone,
really good.
you're certainly going to appeal to the people who were supporting Bernie Sanders. He was very clear on his single-payer Medicare for all. We were this close
Yep.
during Obamacare. We were this close
I
to
know.
getting it,
And the public option is something that, so I want to be clear, I go down there, I fight for what I believe in. But if we get down there and they say, Deglin, we don't want a single payer, but we're willing to bring out the public option, I would take that because I know
It's a good
that's a good step. I believe in what I believe. I know there's people that were previously on your show that are going to disagree with me. I don't think my job is to convince them or agree with everything that they say. My job is to really convince them of why I care about something. And if I do that authentically, then I think they'll give me, not a pass, but they'll say, well, Deglin, I don't agree with him, but he's coming from the right place. And that's really my goal there. And on the Bernie, I'm not running for the Bernie vote, and I'm not running for the Hillary vote. I'm running because my daughter needs to have the same opportunities that I did, and I don't see that happening in this country. I see us really falling behind in the broken system that we are not going to address. And so we're bringing a team together that's Bernie folks and Hillary folks. We
need that. We need that.
We're moving
Absolutely.
past. We're talking about the future.
We got to get past that divide. That's something that
Well, there's
concerns
just
me a lot.
let me kind of recharacterize it. I was not bringing up the topic in an effort to try to put any wedge in or divide anything. I was
Mike, you
bringing
always
up-
get in trouble for this.
I seem to, but what I was trying to point out was that it takes a little bit of courage to actually lay your cards down on the table and say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to pick up this mantle of single payer. I happen to agree with it, so I love a champion of that particular way of providing health care. And I've been frustrated that many candidates who may in their heart believe in something like that were just too timid to say it. And so I'm pleased with your candor.
I will take that as a compliment, Mike. I appreciate that. I think that too often politicians look to an election and say, I need to get elected. We need people that are going to step up as leaders and look at the future. And the ideas are much more important than any specific candidate. If that's not clear to the candidates that are running for the CD1, there's 8 of us. So we can't be that important. You know, we got to think about what are the issues and what are the issues worth fighting for and pushing for, because at the end of the day, the issues are much more important than any particular candidate, because that's what the voter, that's what the people in CD1 care about. And the people are the most important part of this government equation.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is.
And the way it should be, for sure. Is that your top issue then?
So-
your personal experience and your
Yeah.
well-articulated position on this? Is that your top issue?
So that's a big issue for me, and I think that there's a lot of issues, and opioids are a big issue. I think they fall into, for me, mental health, and that's a part of healthcare. I also think that we need to be talking about, okay, if we can make sure that nobody goes bankrupt if they get sick and they get the care they need when they need it, regardless of their ability to pay or not pay, that's something that we should, as Democrats, fight for. The other thing is that we should enable everybody through an education, I believe in the high school level, to go out and get a job that allows you to chase down the American dream. And we've moved away from that. And
I do want you to talk about that, because I was very interested in your ideas on that, so go right ahead.
And it's in direct counterpoint to, we hear the president saying, you know, what are these community colleges? I don't even know what they do.
Yeah.
I don't even know what they are.
Well, he should
And,
come down.
and people don't know about that because he doesn't. you know.
Yeah, so my generation was told that everybody has to go to a 4-year college, and if you don't do that, you have no shot. And I don't think that that is actually true. I think in a lot of ways our focus on pushing people into 4-year colleges is basically saying we're going to privatize education, meaning we're not going to fund that K through 12 or K through 14 on a public level anymore. We're going to ask people to take out loans that they can't default on unless they are dead or fully disabled, and go and spend $120,000 getting an education. And the problem with that right now is that, yeah, it's true, a college-educated person gets more money, earns more money than a high school-educated person, 4 years versus high school. But it's also true that an electrician earns $5,000 more on average than your average 4-year college degree earner. And that's a stat that we don't talk about enough. And I think if we're talking about jobs right here, and politicians, and I always worry about, here's how I'm going to get the jobs back, because then I definitely sound like a politician. But I'd ask any of your viewers to call in if they could guarantee they'll get an electrician to their house tomorrow, because I would like to talk to that caller. But there's a great demand for electricians here in New Hampshire. The average age is 54 years old.
How about auto technicians?
The trades, completely
I'm
the
going
trades.
to break it down even smarter. I work for a steel construction company. We employ Local 7 union laborers throughout the Boston area on construction projects. The hall's empty.
Yep.
There is work out there
Yeah.
for good, qualified welders and iron workers.
And
we can't find the people to do it. And that's what they teach in these community colleges that no one's ever heard
Yeah,
of.
and when you go there as an apprentice, you're going to have a lot of that either paid for or subsidized. It is going to be a great opportunity for you. We're just not-
Three-year apprenticeship program, you're making 80% of what the full union journeyman's making. You're getting absolute training. You're in a union now that's going to practically guarantee work going forward into your future. You've got a pension plan.
Yeah, and here's
It's a
where
great setup.
Here's where I think I bring a different perspective on this. I come from tech and work in tech. These jobs are not going away. These jobs in the trades are bulletproof from my standpoint, because we're going to create robots and algorithms to do a lot. Not, obviously this show here today, because it's unpredictable. And that's the same kind of labor that's unpredictable. We're not going to have robots sweating copper fittings and changing out boilers. We're not going to have robots putting in can lights in a kitchen remodel with a lath and plaster ceiling. That's just not going to happen.
And it can't be outsourced to China because
can't
it
be.
has to happen at the place where you're doing the
It
building.
has to happen at that 1890 house that was built across the street from the one my grandfather built. That's the ticket, and we're not talking about that. And I think I bring a different perspective because I know that we need to be talking about these jobs. And if we can get the Republicans and independents on this side too, I think we can finally start to have a conversation about education. That is, yeah, we believe in education because we want everybody to have the opportunity to get a job and to go out and live that American dream.
Have we gone beyond the tipping point, especially in New Hampshire and especially in Manchester in New Hampshire? The commitment with dollars and cents to public education is dwindling, not improving. It's getting smaller. We're at the bottom of the list. We're the worst.
Yeah.
Now, the outcomes, we have very good outcomes. The teams that we have in place, we have very good teams. Our schools are not the worst schools, but our commitment, in other words, our backing of them, is the worst.
Yeah,
and
and-
how are you going to turn that around to talk about what you were just talking about?
So a lot of that's on the public level, but on the local level, and we have a tough time getting funds here. I am committed to be on workforce and the education as a committee down in Washington. I believe that it's important. I believe that we can get a lot of what's called Title II money for continuing education, and I believe if we brought that back to Manchester, especially with the Army stuff that's going on, Dean Kamen's work, if we could get that so that teachers can learn how to teach coding in the classrooms. Man, we are sitting on Boston and all of the tech talent that's being created in those schools each and every year. If we can draw that up and be a part of that greater Boston metro area and start allowing people to come work here, and then, oh, by the way, we have kindergarten, full day kindergarten, even put preschool on the table, so we show our commitment to actually providing an education for the families that are moving up here. I think we're sitting on a gold mine. I think Manchester is the perfect place to do that, especially with already all of the green shoots that we have in tech. If it's what Dean's doing or if it's what Dine did here, that's a great opportunity. And as New Hampshire, we really need to put resources into making Manchester that hub for the rest of our state in terms of tech jobs.
And even the country.
And even the country. And I think we can do that. And we need to be talking about transportation. And I believe that millennials, and this isn't just me, millennials and older generations, they want walkable cities, they want public transportation. That's the good thing about New Hampshire's aging population, is that we're exactly right where younger generations want to be. We want public transportation, we want walkable cities, we want a sense of community. Those are things that we should take to our advantage and turn that New Hampshire advantage into actually providing jobs and getting people to live here and work here. And I heard you talking about the loan forgiveness. That's a great thing, because right now, our biggest export in New Hampshire is kids. It's me moving back here, that's one of the most unique things about me after going to college. And I wish more of my friends that I grew up with were moving back here. But it's tough when we don't have the jobs. But we got to focus on what you guys are doing here in Manchester to build those jobs.
I have to just, I'm so impressed with what you're saying, Declan.
Bob, this is a great interview.
Well, you're getting nothing but softballs from us. I'm sorry. We'll have the devil's advocate here next time. You're sometimes to be the devil's advocate. I just have to tell you, I have a long-term employee in our office, my law office here in town, 35 years with us, and her kids, her oldest son, who had some talent at hockey, went to New Hampton and played hockey and had a scholarship. And then he went to Southern New Hampshire University for 4 years. And he ended up with a big load of debt.
Yeah.
And she says, frankly, she's very outspoken, this lady. She's really outspoken. She said, I think college is a ripoff. That's what she said. I guess the boy's now doing programs down at the YMCA and so forth, but nothing sufficient to handle the debt.
Yeah.
And I think that's the perfect example of what you're talking about. For a kid like that who was not, inclined to the academic world by his nature, I mean, he had other interests. This is the exact kind of program, it seems to me, a perfect example of what you're talking about, that we should have encouraged this young man who's got a lot to offer to forego the 4 years and the debt and find a way to get a good job. Maybe the job he's got now is fine, but he didn't need 4 years of education.
Yeah, so it's a fine. I believe, and we're going to need an educated, not just workforce, but citizens in our country.
Yes.
And sometimes, and I'm talking about a lot of these things as how I believe we could bring independents and Republicans over the table. Sometimes I get a little pushback in the primary of, well, education just on its value is important. And I believe that completely. We're going to have fake news. We're going to have videos that appear to be real. We're going to need citizens.
You got to teach critical thinking.
We're going to have to teach that.
Yeah.
But we need to include that. And I really think where your colleague's son would have benefited is if there was an opportunity to have a partnership with a firm before they went into college. I really love what Northeastern does, and that they have a guaranteed internship program where
Yeah.
you're going to go 2 years, you're going to have an internship, and then you're going to come back and learn all the things that internship told you that you needed to learn. And and even in the state of New Hampshire, we should have more what's called engineering technology degrees, where you don't have to go for the 4 years, or that 4 years allows you to get more in-field experience so that you can actually start figuring out what you want to do. Not everybody in college, I think, right now is geared towards putting everybody on a track to potentially get a PhD. And I think we got to reevaluate that a little bit. I think that gets more Republicans over to our side at the end of the day, because there's not a single parent that I talk to that doesn't want the best education for their kids.
Right.
A lot of Republicans and independents, though, and Democrats will look at the public school system, and sometimes it gets last on the priority list because people have other options. They can go to private school, they can move to towns, but those options aren't available to everyone.
That's
and
right.
that's why that's the responsibility of the federal and state government to provide that education backbone, because that's how we create a meritocracy. And I think Republican, Democrat, Independent, you believe in a meritocracy here. If you work hard, you deserve the fruits of your labor.
That's right. That's the American dream, after all. Hey, it's time for our final break. This is really speeding
Show
by,
is
isn't it?
flying by.
It really is.
We can talk about the campaign in the
And
next
when we come back, I want to ask Declan how he thinks being in Congress is going to help all these problems be fixed, and why he jumped into this race with 7 other folks. And
As Jack Kennedy said, when you see daylight, go for it.
I hope he sees daylight. I hope we see a lot of daylight for the Democrats. So we'll be right back, folks. Again, if you want to call in, 640-3091. I think we've
It's
had
a great opportunity,
very,
folks.
very interesting discussion, and we will continue it for our final segment in just a second. Or two. Okay, everybody, this is the Progress Report. Hello to everybody in Manchester, Hooksett, Auburn, and hope you're enjoying tonight's show, which we are featuring one of the candidates for the 1st Congressional District Democratic nomination, Declan McEachern, who's
Rolls off the tongue.
Rolls off the tongue.
Once you figure it out, it rolls
Once you
off
got
the
it,
tongue.
you got it. Yeah, it has a nice sound to it too. Who is a young man, obviously, and has thought a lot about what he wants to do, what he thinks we need to do to address some of the real serious issues in this country. We've talked about the health care problems in this country. We've talked about the education, some parts of the educational problem in the country. We've touched on the opiate epidemic, which was related, of course, to the health care issue. And now I think, Declan, if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you, why run for Congress?
Well, and thanks, Bob. It's one more topic, and this maybe ties into the why. I think we have a system that's not working, and I certainly experienced that, and I want to help change that. But the stakes for me are high, and the stakes were never higher than after Parkland just a few months ago. I was sitting there with my daughter, and we were trying to put on.
How old's your daughter, by the way?
She's 19 months old.
Wow.
So she's a little kid, big blue eyes, big ears, kind of like her dad. So she's going to have long hair. But she is full of curiosity and full of wonder. she's not full of any danger. She has no perception of that. She's standing on tables. She's doing everything that a little toddler does, and we couldn't be proud of her of that. We just wish she went to bed earlier. But watching, we put on Moana, and Moana, for your viewers, is a Disney program. I know Moana well because I've watched it 132 times because she watches it every day. But there was a moment where the CNN came on, and I couldn't get her away from the TV, and I saw her absorbing that. And as Moana finally got on the Parkland coverage, it reminded me, well, I'm just happy that we don't have to have that conversation. But I have 3.5 years before I do have to have the conversation on being being taught to be a victim in the same elementary school that I went to. And I'll be damned if I'm going to have that conversation and tell her all of the things that she needs to worry about without also telling her about all the things that we went up and did. And that's really what's driving me in this race is I know the system doesn't work, and it doesn't work for a lot of Americans. I wish the government had been there for us when my wife got sick, but I want the government to be there for my daughter when she needs help. And I want it to be there so that she doesn't have to be taught to be a victim. And the biggest change in the education system that we have seen in the last 100 years isn't that somebody knows where to hide in case of an active shooter, but that she knows how to code and that she knows how to build things, and that she knows and sees the power of the government as a force for good because she's seen it in her own classroom. And that's really why I'm in this race, is because I've seen its failures, but I've also seen the opportunities, and I need to believe much more in the opportunities, at least for my daughter, than I can ever be discouraged by our failings.
You're absolutely right, Declan. I had occasion to go up to we have a wonderful downtown high school here called Manchester Central High School, and it's an incredible institution. I think it's the oldest public high school in the state. In the state, isn't it? You're on the Year Memorial guy. I don't want to forget that. Fine school too. And we went down there because the kids were going to come out to do a 17-minute, protest of the 17 lives lost at Parkland, and I was astonished that we had to be on the opposite side of the street from where the school is, and this big sign saying no trespassing.
Yeah.
And on the plaza where they have the statue of Abraham, the seated statue of Abraham Lincoln, I hadn't been up there, even though it's pretty close to where my office is. And it just struck me, this is where our schools are at now, Yeah. I mean, there's all this emphasis on protecting against the next horror show of a mass shooting or possibility of it. And it's just so distressing.
Well, they're making them into fortresses as opposed to integral
Temples.
parts of the community.
Yeah.
Good.
They should be they should be where we all come together and recognize the future. That's where the future is brightest. And when I was up at Kennett High, up in North Conway, I got to talk to a lot of kids that are our future. And I think they are a pretty good BS detector. And I really believe that we got to harness their power, not just for this election, but to keep them involved and engaged and not disappoint them. And I mean that by not getting into office or Congress or governor and then telling yourself that there's a bigger fight down the road, that there's something more important and you can compromise on this so you can get that. I want to be the type of politician that is really standing for something. And that's the promise I made to my wife when we decided to do this. She said, you got to go down there and make some change, or else I'm not committing. And my daughter voted with my wife on whether or not we were going to do this. So
really,
that's charming. It was going to be 2 to 1.
The heat's on.
The heat's on, and that's an awesome responsibility. But we owe it to the high school kids right now. To be able to carry their passion and their mantle forward and to say that we're energized by that and we're not going to just give them soundbite answers, that we're going to talk about it.
Declan, I certainly appreciate you're taking inspiration from the young high school kids, especially after Parkland and what we've seen and everything you're saying. And I'm going to push back just a little bit. You're aspiring to a very high goal. Why did you choose to jump right in for Congress and not maybe do something a little bit more local, something more within the state, something like that? It's you're jumping into the deep end of the pool, and I'd like to probe that a little bit.
Yeah, so and I'm glad you asked, because I think there's a lot of viewers are wondering, why haven't you got your lumps? Why haven't you paid your dues? But I think for too long we've had politicians that go down to Congress, that's been their life goal to go down to Congress. That hasn't been my life goal, although it is a worthy one to go right now, and now it's my 100%, my full effort. But I believe that we need to go down there as leaders, and we need to be able to fight not for elections, but for the future of the party and of this country. And so that's really important. On a practical level, Medicare for all and the healthcare system, if I thought we could solve that in Concord, I would be solving that and I would be fighting for it in Concord. I see an opportunity to do so down in Washington, and that's a lot of ways where I feel like we're going to be able to get money, even for education. If I truly believe we're going to get a lot more, if we're going to turn over some stones in Concord and start funding, preschool and full-day kindergarten across the state, I'd be here fighting that battle. But I want to go down there to Washington to bring money back here to this state because we need that. We need
Well,
to
I mean,
commit to
we
the
certainly
system.
don't get back what we put into it. Our input for every dollar we send down to Washington, we get back, 77 cents or
Well,
something.
I don't know, but that figure doesn't impress me at all, because that's the federal system. Some states, need more and get more, and that's the federal system.
Well, I don't begrudge it, but I do think that we certainly are not sitting high on the hog, and we certainly have needs that are not being met. So let's get more up here, and I certainly agree with that.
So you must not be one of the things that Congress is irrevocably broken and dysfunctional if you want to be part of it.
No, I don't. Because I believe what Teddy Roosevelt said, that we are the government, you and us. Together we're the government. And Congress is made up of people. People that are getting a lot of money from lobbyists and corporate PACs and all of that, but at the end of the day, it's people. And we have the power in this. If everybody voted that believed in what we believed in, we wouldn't have the problem with money in politics, because we wouldn't have to get the enthusiasm and get people to notice and pay attention. I think if we go down there and talk about issues that people care about, and again, not sort of talk about poll-tested issues that might sound good to everybody at the same time. I'm not going to be that candidate. I'm not planning to sound good to everybody. I want to sound authentic because I believe in something. And I believe ultimately I'm going to win Republicans and independents over because I'm talking without, a filter that everything is being processed through.
Now,
That's
do you have a
important.
job you're having to leave for this
I will.
campaign?
So yeah, I'll be stepping away in June full time. I've pared back, so I manage the accounts in the East Coast for my company right now that's based in San Francisco, and I'm going to step away from that completely in June. And
Oh, that's really swinging out there.
it is. It takes a full, not a mild interest. I had a rowing coach that said this thing, it just takes 100%. But think about what 100% is. 100% of what you try to do is more than most people can give to something. But that's what I'm prepared to do, because I have the backing of my family to do this, and I have more stories than I care, and the experience to remember when I'm talking in the campaign trail with people and learning how the government has failed them. That keeps me going. Talking to young people, being inspired by them, that keeps me going. And then what my wife and I went through, that's a big
It's
part
a
of it.
very compelling story, and there's 8 in this field. How are you going to break out and
Yeah.
make your brand distinctive and popular?
So it's that's the best part of this, is that we're talking to voters. So if voters are wanting more information on all my issues, not every candidate is putting all of their issues on their website. We put all of our issues on our website because we believe in being upfront. We're not waiting to a general election to unveil where we stand. But so if you go on to Deglin for Congress, and I saying that, I realized that unless there's some video that's running how to spell my name underneath it, that's going to be tough. But DEAGLAN for Congress, you're going to find out where I stand. You're also going to have the ability to sign up for email and to volunteer. And we're going to raise money that's necessary, and we've raised certainly enough to be able to put this campaign together. But we're really powered on people believing in this message, believing that there's an opportunity for change in this country, and joining the campaign and having their voice be heard, because that's the most important part of this campaign. I, in most ways, am the least important part of this campaign. I'm just the guy with a message. It's the volunteers that we have. It's the 150 volunteers so far. It's the team on the ground that we're assembling. That's really how we are. that's how we're moving this ball forward.
Tell us a little bit more of the details of the nuts and bolts of the campaign.
Yeah, so my wife-
we can talk about policy, but that's all once you get there.
Yep.
Do you have any offices open? Are
Yep,
you
so we're
ordering up your
opening an office
signs?
right there.
Who's on your team?
Yep, so my wife is our campaign manager. We have hired a political director. We've hired a field organizer. We've hired a field director. We are looking to hire 2 more field organizers, so get the resumes in if you're in Manchester. We'd love to have you on the team. And we're opening an office that we're in the process of signing the lease for right now. That's going to be in Portsmouth, and we look forward to opening an office in Manchester as we progress.
I imagine you'll be spending quite a lot of time in Manchester.
We will, and I love Manchester. I think that part of the problem with New Hampshire is that we don't get to talk to one another. We don't have a rail that connects us. But Manchester, especially from a guy in the tech community, I've spent a lot of time in Manchester already, and I'm committed to spending even more time and getting to know everybody and introducing that guy over on the seacoast to everyone. I think everybody in Manchester will be pleasantly surprised that I share a lot of the vision that you have for this city, because it's the vision we need to have for this state.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well,
You mentioned rail.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about your position on commuter rail. It's very important to both Bob and myself. We're both for bringing commuter rail back to Manchester. We've hit on the point that the tech companies are begging for it because they feel it'll make them more attractive and allow them to get the workforce that they need, maybe who might want to live south of us and come up. But I've said too much. Tell us a little bit about where you stand on it.
Those are all great points. So I'll more than how I feel, I'll tell you what we did on this so far. So my wife and I started New Hampshire for Amazon, not because we love the idea of Amazon coming in here, but we wanted this state to look honestly at what it needed to attract a big company like that, or any company like that. And so rail is a part of that, education is a part of that, and I'm proud to say that a lot of people have tried to get Chris Sununu, our governor, to change his mind on rail. He changed it for a week.
yeah,
But that's a week longer than anybody other politician has gotten to change it for. And so I believe rail is critical to connecting our communities together, to connecting where the jobs are to where the housing is not only affordable but desirable. And that's the real key, I think, to New Hampshire, is to recognize that we need public transportation to connect us in a way that is on time. And rail has an opportunity to do that where I don't think buses can. And being able to connect down to the Boston metro area where we can pull people up here, I would much rather live here. And the reason why that's critical is because eventually we are going to have people that are commuting down there. And they'll see the guy next to them or the gal next to them, and they'll be like, you know what? We got a good idea. Why don't we start it here in New Hampshire? Why don't we cut this commute out and start this here? And that would bring the density that we need in this state and draw on the density that already is present in Boston to really start companies up here at a much higher clip.
Yeah. I just have to say, I've been delving into the governor's newly announced energy strategy. Mm-hmm. One of the lines in there, we should put people in car seats, not in railroad cars. That's verbatim from the governor's energy strategy.
How pithy.
Yeah, how pithy, how stupid.
Well, we're out of time, Bob.
retrograde. We're out of time.
Can't believe it.
You want to make a quick pitch where people can help out or contribute, or I guess you've done it, Deglin for Congress.
Yeah, DeglinForCongress.com. It would be great if everybody could come to the website, see where I stand. If you could like the Facebook page and follow me at Deglin M, DeaglanM on Twitter.
Any events coming up in Manchester where you should tell people?
We have a canvas coming up this Saturday, so
people can help out?
Details to be on the Facebook page and the website. So if you want to help knock on some doors right in your hometown, we're coming to you, and we're going to be knocking on some doors.
Thanks for coming and joining us, Deglin.
Bob,
We've thoroughly enjoyed our time with you. I expected we would, and we did. I'll be back next week, folks, with Lou D'Alessandro, and we'll have another edition of the Progress Report at that time. Thank you for watching.